What else affects weather than just weather? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods, talking about nature right outside your front door. There is some interesting phenomena as I go out that maybe you never heard of. I came across this a few years ago, but I started finding out that there's all sorts of things that affect weather patterns locally that can change how weather is. Where I live, there happens to be a number of lakes. And these lakes are believed to have fully diverted massive storms around them. That when we see the storm, it's coming right at us. And oh no, it's really dangerous. It eventually weakens right as it gets to us. And there's this rumor that goes around town that it is potentially the lakes that are causing these storms to die down or divert around us. And you think about it, water heats and cools more slowly than land. The land absorbs heat all through the day, and then the water is cooler. And as soon as maybe those clouds get over the lake, it causes that air in the lake to stay more put and then calm down that circulation system. Maybe it's true. If the thunderstorms are approaching from the west, sometimes it feels like they split around the lakes and the strongest cells go north and south and dodges sort of the middle where the city is at. It may be, too, that the way that the moisture works and the way that the wind buffers could have something to do with that. I don't know, but that was what was kind of interesting to me. And think about in these lakes, it can start picking up moisture from lakes, not just the Great Lakes, but little lakes too, causing lake effect snow to happen on the other side, the far side of the lake. You'll see that with the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, all the Great Lakes. When storm systems go up, there's a ton of snow that goes on the other side of the lake as that storm moves through. It's picking up a brand new source of moisture. When you're up here in the North Woods, we tend to get our moisture as it kind of peaks up from the Gulf of Mexico or even maybe towards Baja California. But that moisture comes from the southwest and moves into the Midwest, hits that colder air, and the two of them, that's what makes our big snowstorms. That's what makes our big thunderstorms. But it has that lake effect snow just on a more smaller scale when you have little tiny lakes. So absolutely, the terrain can affect it. Now, we are in a very rolling area. It's called the Driftless area. This was an area that was relatively untouched or carved out by glaciers around us. And then the water started running in and created these rolling hills, these ridges, bluffs. And sometimes in this driftless area, the storm's temperatures are varied. Bluffs, tall hills can affect how the temperature exists. Storms need that confrontation between hot and cold. And I noticed that when I was camping, it was in a very bluffy area. And it was very cool inside this sort of valley of area. And then when my friend and I drove out to so she could attend a meeting, it got brutally hot because suddenly we were just baking in the sun. That temperature differential can cause storms to churn up and become more severe. I always believed to some extent that these bluffs that are around us everywhere would prevent tornadoes. It's really funny because I've never seen a tornado go over one of these very high bluffs. And when that tornado outbreak happened a couple of weeks ago, there was a tornado going right up the bluff. And I said, well, there goes that theory. Some other things that can affect the weather that we don't think about is the fact that there is urban heat. It, in the city itself, is much hotter than what it would be out in the countryside. Think you get concrete, you get black roads, you get these buildings with black tops on them. There was some people that were talking about maybe putting rooftop gardens like in Chicago to prevent the city from being such a heat sink. But as you get cities that start making these areas hotter, so imagine a big cold front is moving in from Canada and it hits Chicago hot. because it has all these artificial surfaces that soak in the heat and won't give it up as readily. Suddenly you have a bigger conflict of air. And I think that's why, in general, Chicago gets hit with storms all the time. It is allowing these storms to get really built up. It also means that when you're inside of a city, it is a ton hotter than it is out in the countryside. So we see that. Unfortunately, what has happened over the years is when I look in my own town, there were all these weather sensors that were placed out by the airport. That used to be in the middle of nowhere. The airport was in the middle of nowhere, and now it's smack dab in the middle of town. So it is heating up because of all the concrete, all the buildings around it. And I wish they would do something to move the sensors back out into the country so there could be sort of apples to apples. But that's what's happened over the last 100 years. About 1880, they started putting up weather sensors and thermometers out in places. Those used to be out in the countryside, and now they're smack dab in the middle of urban areas. So having a city can also affect the temperature. The big one, and the one that most people didn't know about, is something called corn sweat. Did you ever hear about corn sweat before? It's a real thing that happens when you're out in corn country. The quick explanation of it is basically that corn and plant material in general has this evaporative perspiration of water. So it's grabbing water from the groundwater, it's going into the leaves, and then it perspires out, just like we perspire out a little bit, not in the same mechanics, right? So on a hot day, acres of corn suddenly are releasing thousands of gallons of water vapor into the air. It affects local humidity. It affects the weather, because if maybe a storm system is coming through, but it's not getting enough Gulf moisture to gin up into storms, what will happen is that it will take that corn humidity and create storms. And you might start seeing popcorn storms popping up all over the place because it is able to tap in to that new humid air that's right there. And think about it that when air is more humid, it doesn't release the heat. The heat stays closer to the ground. So in areas where there's a lot of corn growing, it will feel hot, it will feel very humid, and it will start to affect the weather we have here in the summertime. And corn sort of reaches its tall height starting around July 4th. Everyone always says like knee high at July 4th. Good corn. And it has been a good corn year. So this term, corn sweats, went viral back in 2016 when meteorologists started describing this phenomenon. As our temperature sensors get better, we are able now to understand humidity and heat and cooling in more local areas that we didn't quite know. And we're starting to just understand more. The fact that urban areas are 10 degrees hotter Fahrenheit than the rural settings, that cities can affect wind patterns, but corn sweats, the whole corn evaporating a moisture there. Even to some extent, farm animals or animals in general, and even bodies, people bodies, animal bodies, farm bodies. We are living beings that have, like near 100-degree temperatures walking around, maybe in cooler air, releasing heat. Forests also can cool the air as opposite to other places. It's dark in there, the sun is not reaching the ground, and it also will release moisture at the same time. So forests can be cooling and moisturizing to there, creating their own local rain cycles. Think about the Amazon, right? The Amazon has moisture coming in from all the greenery. When it comes to, like I said, large herds of animals, they can impact the heat locally. And some journalists have recorded, but we're still studying these kinds of things, that when there are cattle drives, the heat and the moisture goes up. It's kind of interesting. Think about other parts of farmland. We talked about corn sweats, but what about irrigation? As farmers are irrigating their field, raises the local humidity in that area. Some fields might even be cooler than the surrounding dry area because of the evaporation of that cooling air, right? When we're sweating, we feel cooler. It cools off areas as long as it's not too much moisture. Same thing that happens inside of fields that are irrigated. And then you think about things too, that high-flying planes leave behind contrails. That almost acts like cloud cover. Because if you get a place, think about Minneapolis or places, Chicago, that have a lot of contrails that are flying over them, that can actually cool the area around them because they act like clouds and sort of bounce off sun's radiation from it. There are some studies now showing that the wind turbine raises nighttime temperatures on the ground. Think about it this way. So night comes and the sun goes down, and the ground temperature tends to be a little bit cooler, while higher up it tends to be a little bit warmer. Those air patterns stay stratified. But now if you have something blowing around and mixing up the air, now we start getting a little bit warmer air down at the ground level. It's kind of interesting as well. Like I said, we're learning so much more about things that just affect weather. There are other things like volcanoes that have huge dusty eruptions. Think about like Mount Pinatubo or some of these big volcanoes we've had, the E1 that happened in Iceland. They cause these particles to go up into the atmosphere and not reach the ground. They also will act like clouds. There was some volcano that went off in Iceland, I think it was somewhere around 1000 AD, that caused millions of people to die, according to this book, in Europe because it cooled them off and they couldn't grow crops in certain areas. Beavers. Beavers are another thing that affect the local weather. They create, like let's say you have a river, and they dam up the river into sort of small mini ponds, and they go into wetlands and they dam up water. This creates the ability to not dry out as easily. So let's say you have some kind of a marshland, and in the spring it fills up with water, and somewhere in the summer it dries out and becomes very low level water. The beaver dams will create these pockets of water that don't dry out. And so they actually make the area more humid. They make the area have access to water for a longer period of time and prevent droughts from happening in that area. Places for animals to drink water and plants to grow much longer than if there were no beavers. There's even times when we've seen, and you can tell on weather shows, they'll talk about this. Can you tell I watched the Weather Channel for far too much time back in the 90s? Dust will come, they're being blown across the ocean and start hitting more of the southern areas of the United States. And they can start creating different kinds of sunsets, affecting cloud formations, and even help in suppressing hurricanes. I have seen where they say, oh, hurricane's coming. And what's happening is the storm system kicked up so much sand and dust from the Sahara that it almost ended up killing off that storm system entirely, making sure that it never quite ended up as a full-blown hurricane. We also have seen recently fires happening in Canada, and it's causing smoke to dump into the Midwest and going all the way out to New York City, causing the air quality to drop. But what happens too is it makes it so it almost looks like a perfectly sunny day is cloudy, foggy. And so when they say, oh, it's going to get up to 90 degrees, on this day, and then that smoke comes in, it never quite gets that high because that sun is never hitting us. It's hitting the smoke in the higher atmosphere. So it has, besides making us all cough and choke, actually caused the area to cool down and not be as hot as it was supposed to be. So there are small things that affect the weather, both on a regional area, but also on a local area. It's not just about fronts and jet streams, but it's instead about what's going on around us. What are we growing and what are we building? And so the next time you look around and it's very humid and maybe a little thunderstormy, you can start blaming the corn. All right, everyone. I appreciate you listening to this podcast and watching this on YouTube. Please remember that you can always email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. I would love to hear from you. Have you seen corn sweats, or have you seen other weather phenomena that happens in your neck of the woods that is created by something that's around your town? I appreciate you listening, and remember to go out there and go see corn sweats.